There is a number etched into the side of an old almanac sitting in a farmhouse in Appalachian, Kentucky. The number is 9. 9 people fed through a full winter blizzards. Iche. No running water. No grocery delivery off a half-acre of ground, and a milk cow. The man who did it was named Walter Boyd. And the first thing he put in the ground wasn't a spring crop. It was a September 1. Beet seed. Turnip seed. Carrot seed. A row of rye across the low end to hold the soil through the freeze. From the first frost to the mud of spring thaw. Walter Boyd never set foot in a store. Most people reading this couldn't put a week of meals on the table if every grocery within driving distance closed on a Monday morning. We've been taught to believe September means the garden is over, finished, spent. Walter Boyd knew September was, when the garden that actually sustains you goes in. Today, we're counting down 12 vegetables, most of them backed by scripture, used across ancient civilizations, and validated by modern nutritional science that you can still put in the ground this September. Pay close attention when we reach number 1. It's the crop that fed armies, sustained desert wanderers for 40 years, and is mentioned more times in the Hebrew scriptures than almost any other plant. Most people have a version of it dried in their kitchen cabinet right now and have no idea it's even a vegetable. And stay with me through number 6. I'm going to tell you the story of a botanical that appears in the Book of Numbers, the plant a wandering people described with homesick longing from the middle of a desert, and what researchers found when they finally put it under a microscope. Number 12. Garlic. In the 16th chapter of the Book of Numbers, the Israelites in the wilderness cry out in anguish not for water, not for freedom, but for food they remember. They name it specifically cucumbers, melon, leeks, onions, and garlic. This is not metaphor. These are the actual agricultural staples of ancient Egypt, documented through tomb paintings, papyrus records, and the archaeological record of Deir el-Medina, the village of the workers who built the Valley of the Kings. Garlic wasn't peasant food in Egypt. It was wages. Herodotus recorded that the inscription on the Great Pyramid at Giza listed the quantities of garlic and onions paid to the laborers who built it. Every serious ancient civilization that left written records used garlic medicinally. The Ebers Papyrus of Egypt, dated to 1550 B.C., lists 22 garlic preparations. Hippocrates recommended it for respiratory conditions and fatigue. Dioscorides, the Greek physician who traveled with Roman armies, documented garlic as the soldier's herb, standard field medicine. Chinese practitioners referenced it in texts dating to 510 A.D. Ayurvedic tradition called it rasona, meaning lacking one of the 6 tastes, and prescribed it for digestive strength and cardiovascular support. Independent civilizations. Samiplant. Sam conclusion. Modern biochemistry has identified what those ancient practitioners were observing without naming. The primary active compound in garlic, allicin, is not present in a raw, uncut clove. It forms only when the enzyme alliinase, kept in a separate cellular compartment, contacts a lion after the cell wall is broken by chopping or crushing. This is why the preparation matters. A clove swallowed whole provides none of what a crushed clove provides. Peer-reviewed studies, including a 2016 meta-analysis published in the Journal of Nutrition, found associations between garlic consumption and modest but measurable reductions in systolic blood pressure, results consistent enough to warrant continued investigation. Garlic also contains organosulfur compounds including diallyl disulfide and S-allylcysteine, both of which have been studied for their effects on immune function and inflammatory pathways. Here is the preparation detail. Almost no guide mentions crush your garlic clove and let it sit exposed to air for 10 to 15 minutes before cooking. That window allows the allicin reaction to complete. Heat destroys the enzyme rapidly. If you drop a raw clove straight into hot oil, the reaction never fully occurs. Crush. Wait. Then cook. The taste will be slightly more pungent. The color slightly more yellow. That is allicin doing what 4,000 years of farmers observed it doing before anyone had a name for it. The ancient physicians didn't have gas chromatography. They had patience, and they had generations of careful observation. The molecular biology is now catching up to what they already knew. For September, planting hardneck varieties, music, German extra hardy. Chestnut red go in now. 2 inches deep. 6 inches apart. Pointy, end up, mulch deep after the ground hardens. Pull next July when the bottom leaves brown. 1 clove in, 1 head out. The seed for the following year lives in the largest heads you set aside. Number 11. Leeks. Leeks share the wilderness lament of Numbers chapter 11 alongside garlic. And the connection is not coincidental. In ancient Egypt, leeks were so nutritionally central that they appeared in medical texts as a treatment for hemorrhage and as a strengthening food for physical laborers. The Roman writer Pliny the Elder noted that Emperor Nero ate leeks in oil daily, believing they clarified the voice, and while modern science wouldn't frame it that way, the preparation he described, leeks slow-cooked in olive oil, is a genuinely sound delivery mechanism for fat-soluble plant compounds. What most people don't know is that the leek was the primary allium in Northern European traditional medicine for a specific reason: it could overwinter in the ground when garlic and onions could not. Welsh physicians in the medieval period recorded leeks as a wound-dressing herb, the mucilaginous sap applied directly to lacerations. That use aligns with what we now know about the prebiotic fiber content, specifically fructoligosaccharides, which support the gut microbiome, and flavonoids including kaempferol, which has been studied in laboratory settings for its effects on cellular stress response. Here is the counterintuitive preparation detail. Almost no guide shares the dark green tops of the leek. The part most home cooks discard contain the highest concentration of flavonoids. The tender white base is culinary tradition. The green tops are the medicinal material. Ancient practitioners in Wales and Scotland use those tops specifically. Chop them fine and add them at the end of cooking to preserve the compounds. Or dry them for winter tea. Plant leek transplants or direct sow seeds in September, in mild climates. They need 120 days, but tolerate hard frost and can be pulled all winter through a mulch layer. 1 row gives you a cold season allium harvest that needs no storage. Just leave them in the ground and pull as needed. Number 10. Kale. The brassicas, the entire mustard family, appear repeatedly across the ancient world as both food and medicine, and kale represents the oldest cultivated form of the species. Varieties resembling modern kale appear in Roman agricultural texts, and there is strong evidence that Celtic and Germanic peoples depended on leaf brassicas as a core cold-season food source through the Iron Age. The Scottish tradition of kale, a pot of kale simmered with grain or meat, gave its name to the kitchen itself. The kale yard was the kitchen garden. You were what you grew. Greek physicians classified brassicas as cooling and detoxifying. And while the specific language differs from modern biochemistry, what they were observing maps onto something real. Kale contains glucosinolates, sulfur-containing compounds that, when the plant tissue is chopped or chewed, are converted by the enzyme myrosinase into isothiocyanates, particularly sulforaphane. Sulforaphane has been among the most studied plant compounds in recent decades, with laboratory and clinical research examining its role in activating the NRF2 pathway, which regulates the body's antioxidant response. Results are considered promising enough to sustain continued research investment. The preparation truth: most guides omit cooking, destroys myrosinase. If you steam or boil kale, you denature the enzyme and dramatically reduce sulforaphane formation. But, and this is the rare detail, if you chop the kale raw and wait 40 minutes before cooking it, the conversion largely completes before heat touches it. Alternatively, add a small amount of raw mustard seed or raw daikon, both contain stable myrosinase, to cooked kale, and the reaction can still occur. Ancient fermented preparations of brassicas, like Korean kimchi and Central European sauerkraut, naturally preserve these compounds through lactofermentation. Dwarf Siberian and Red Russian are the September varieties of record. Direct sow, half an inch deep. Thin, to 12 inches. 2 hard frosts transform the flavor. Starch converts to sugar, and the bitterness moderates. The old-timers waited for that conversion deliberately. 1 row. 5 months of greens. And the best nutrition in the row happens after the weather turns against everything else. Number 9. Turnips. The turnip appears in Roman agricultural writing as a staple of the legionary diet, and there is reason for that beyond mere availability. Columella. Writing in the 1st century A.D., devoted considerable space to turnip cultivation and noted that the greens were as valuable as the root, a detail consistently confirmed by modern nutritional analysis. Turnip greens contain more calcium per 100 grams than milk, more vitamin K than almost any other common vegetable, and a meaningful profile of glucosinolates, similar to their brassica relatives. In Ayurvedic medicine, the turnip was prescribed specifically for kapha-type imbalances, what modern medicine might describe as sluggish, lymphatic, or respiratory conditions. TCM practitioners use the root for what they call dispersing stagnation in the middle jiao, which aligns, at least conceptually, with its known effects on bile production and digestive motility. Egyptian records from the New Kingdom document turnip cultivation in Delta Garden. 4 civilizations. Sama root. Same broad therapeutic application. Here is the detail every modern guide omits: the glucosinolate profile in turnip greens is meaningfully different from the root. The greens contain sinigrin, converted to allylisothiocyanate, while the root contains gluconostertin, a compound associated with different metabolic pathways. Traditional practitioners who ate both the root and the top were intuitively getting a broader spectrum of compounds than those who used one or the other. The modern habit of discarding turnip greens is one of the stranger nutritional losses of the 20th century. Plant purple top white globe in September. They'll mature in 60 days. Direct sow, half an inch deep. Thin to 4 to 6 inches. A light frost sweetens the root, as starch converts to sugar. Pull before hard freeze or mulch, and harvest through mild winters. The greens are ready to cut from the moment the tops reach 6 inches tall. Number 8. Beets. The beet has a specific and fascinating scriptural connection that most people overlook. The plant referenced in the Hebrew text as sekel, or in some translations as field plants, consumed by a prophet in 2 Kings chapter 4. The episode of the poisoned pot of stew at Gilgal is now generally understood by botanical historians to be a wild beet relative, likely Beta maritima, the ancestor of every cultivated beet eaten today. The text describes someone gathering wild greens in a field and bringing them to a communal pot, a scene of foraging that would have been entirely ordinary in the ancient Levant. Every Mediterranean civilization cultivated beets. Greek physicians prescribed beet juice for fever. Roman writers documented beetroot storage as a winter food staple. Ancient Arabic medical texts described beet preparations for liver conditions. Modern research has focused on dietary nitrates, compounds abundant in beetroot that are converted in the body through a salivary bacteria pathway to nitric oxide, a molecule that dilates blood vessels. A series of trials at the University of Exeter found that beetroot juice consumption measurably improved exercise tolerance in older adults, results the researchers described as warranting further investigation in cardiovascular support application. Here is the rare preparation detail. The nitrate content of beetroot is highest in the skin and the outer 2 millimeters of flesh. Peeling beets removes a meaningful portion of their most studied active compound. Traditional preparations roasting whole beets wrapped in their own skin, or eating pickled beets with the skin on preserved what modern kitchen habits discard. The greens, meanwhile, contain betaine in high concentrations, a compound studied for its role in supporting methylation pathways and liver function. Detroit Dark Red, the open-pollinated variety introduced in the 1890s, is still among the finest fall-sowing beets available. Plant half an inch deep, 1 to 2 inches apart. Rows 12 to 18 inches apart. Thin to 3 to 4 inches. Harvest roots at 1.5 to 3 inches for best flavor. Store in boxes of barely moist sand in a cool space. Beets in good sand cellar conditions keep through April. Number 7. Vischat. Chard and beet are the same species, a fact most people find genuinely surprising. Swiss chard is simply the leaf-selected form of Beta vulgaris, bred over centuries for expansive, productive foliage rather than enlarged root. The same plant, different expression. Ancient Sicilian records Sicily being the likely origin of modern chard cultivation, describe leaf beet cultivation as early as the 4th century B.C. Aristotle's student Theophrastus mentioned it in his botanical writings. The specific detail that crosses cultures chard appears in traditional Greek, Arabic, and North African medical texts as a blood-building food. The Arabic physician Ibn Sina Avicenna listed leaf beet as a treatment for what his system described as blood deficiency. Modern analysis reveals why this cross-cultural convergence might have made empirical sense. Chard contains betulin pigments, the same red and yellow compounds found in beetroot, along with meaningful quantities of iron, magnesium, and vitamin K. The betulins in chard are antioxidant compounds that have been studied for their effects on inflammatory signaling. With research ongoing, here is the preparation detail. Almost no guide shares. Betulins are water-soluble and heat-sensitive. Boiling chard in large quantities of water and discarding the cooking liquid removes a significant portion of the pigmented compounds. Traditional Mediterranean preparations, braising chard briefly in olive oil with a splash of lemon preserve, far more of the betulin content than the American habit of boiling and draining. The acid in the lemon also stabilizes the color, and, according to recent food chemistry research, appears to increase betulin bioavailability. Sow rainbow chard in September. Direct sow, half an inch deep, 2 to 4 inches apart. Thin to 6 to 8 inches. Cut outer leaves and the plant regenerates from the center. It holds through frost better than almost any other green. And the stems become sweeter as temperatures drop. If this kind of ancient knowledge resonates with you, the place where scripture, traditional medicine, and modern science converge, hit like and subscribe. Because what's coming next goes even deeper. Number 6. Cucumbers. Now, the wilderness lament of Numbers chapter 11. Picture the scene. 40 years of desert travel, no shade trees, ground that burns through the leather of your sandals by mid-morning. The diet is manna described in the text as white, tasting of oil and honey, gathered each morning before the sun evaporated it. Adequate. Perhaps, but not what they knew. And the people remembered what they had eaten in Egypt. The text names them fish, cucumbers, melon, leeks, onions, garlic. This specific list has been studied by biblical botanists and food historians for centuries. And the cucumber, kishashwim, in Hebrew is identified with near certainty as Cucumis sativus, the same species cultivated today. Egyptian agricultural records confirm it. Excavations at ancient sites in the Nile Delta have uncovered cucumber seeds dated to the 18th dynasty. The longing wasn't nostalgia for luxury. It was the body's memory of hydration, of electrolytes, of something cool in a landscape that provided none of those things. That isn't just poetry. That is a description of physiological need. Cucumbers are 96% water by weight, higher than almost any other food. They contain potassium, magnesium, and small amounts of silica, a mineral studied for its potential role in connective tissue integrity. Their skin contains cucurbitacins, compounds studied in laboratory settings for their effects on inflammatory pathways, which is why traditional herbalists across India, China, and the Middle East often prescribed cucumber preparations with the skin intact. Modern research has examined cucumber seed oil for its essential fatty acid profile, particularly linoleic acid, and the flesh for its content of fisetin, a flavonoid studied at the Salk Institute for its potential effects on cellular senescence. With early results, researchers describe as warranting continued investigation. The preparation detail most guides omit the bitter compounds in cucumber skin, including cucurbitacins, concentrate in the stem end. Traditional Indian preparations removed the stem end and rubbed cut surfaces together to draw out bitter latex before eating, a practice that also removed some of the harshest cucurbitacins while preserving the skin's silica and flavonoid content for the rest of the fruit. Plant a cold-hardy variety like Space Master or a short-season Armenian cucumber in early September. In mild climates, they need 60 to 70 days. In colder zones, start under row cover. One plant in a 5-gallon container on a south-facing wall will extend your season 3 weeks past first frost. Number 5. Collard greens. Collards are among the oldest cultivated brassicas on record, with a lineage traceable to ancient Anatolia and the eastern Mediterranean. Greek and Roman agricultural writers described leaf cabbages consistent with what we now classify as collards, and the plant spread through North Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, the Iberian Peninsula, and ultimately to the Americas, through the complex and painful routes of the slave trade, meaning that collard greens carry within them the entire history of human displacement and resilience on multiple continents. West African traditional medicine used leaf brassicas extensively for conditions associated with what practitioners called heat in the body, a concept that maps at least partially onto inflammatory states in modern language. The preparation was specific, long, slow cooking, with a small amount of fat palm oil in West Africa. Lard. In Appalachian tradition, a technique that turns out to be biochemically sound, the fat-soluble vitamins K, E, and the carotenoids in collard greens, lutein, and zeaxanthin specifically require dietary fat for absorption. Cooking collards without any fat source dramatically reduces the bioavailability of these compounds. Every grandmother who cooked collards with a piece of smoked pork was doing something that modern nutritional science now formally validates. Collards also contain the highest calcium content of any common leafy green, more than milk on a per-calorie basis, along with sulforaphane precursors similar to kale. Here is the rarely discussed detail: collard greens, unlike kale, contain significant amounts of preformed vitamin K2 in the form of MK4, a menaquinone associated in research with bone density maintenance. Most discussions of vitamin K focus on K1 from leafy greens. The K2 content in cooked collards has been measured in studies and found to be meaningfully higher than in raw, one of the few vegetables where cooking increases a specific nutrient's measured presence rather than diminishing it. Plant Champion, or Georgia Southern. In September, direct sow or transplant 12 to 18 inches apart. Harvest bottom leaves first, and the plant keeps climbing. Light frost improves flavor. In Kentucky, historically, a good collard stalk fed a family from October through March. One plant, half a year of greens. Number 4. Spinach. Spinach has an origin story most people don't know. It is not a Mediterranean plant. Its origin is Persia, modern Iran, and it spread westward along trade routes, reaching the Arab world by the 7th century A.D. and Europe. By the 11th century, Arab agricultural writers called it the Prince of Vegetables. Moorish Spain introduced it to northern Europe, where it spread rapidly because it could survive winter in ways that most Mediterranean greens could not. This Persian to Arab to European transmission means that spinach appears in medieval Islamic medical texts long before European herbals noticed it. Ibn Butlan, writing in the 11th century, classified spinach as a cold and moist food useful for lubricating the intestines, language that aligns with its known mucilaginous fiber content. Persian traditional medicine used spinach juice specifically as a treatment for what practitioners called dry cough again, a preparation that makes biochemical sense given spinach's water content and its folate and magnesium profile, both of which support respiratory muscle function. Modern nutritional science has focused on spinach for its nitrate content second only to beetroot among common vegetables, and for its unusual thylakoid content. Thylakoids are membrane structures from spinach's chloroplasts that, in research conducted primarily in Sweden, have been shown to slow fat digestion and affect the release of satiety hormones, including GLP-1, the practical implication being studied. Consuming spinach before or with a fat-containing meal may extend the sensation of fullness by a mechanism distinct from fiber. The preparation detail almost no one discusses. Oxalic acid in raw spinach binds calcium and iron, significantly reducing their absorption. Traditional Persian and Arab preparations almost universally cooked spinach briefly, in small amounts of fat. Modern raw spinach salads, while not harmful, provide less mineral value than a brief sauté in olive oil. Spinach, the form most widely sold today, is harvested before the leaves develop full oxalic acid content, which is why it tastes milder, but also before it develops full thylakoid and nitrate concentrations. Bloomsdale longstanding. The open-pollinated variety, introduced in 1826. Sown in the last week of August or first week of September. Gives you leaves through December and often past it under a straw mulch. Sow half an inch deep, 1 inch apart. Thin to 4 to 6 inches. On a row, 4 months of the plant, Arab physicians called the prince of vegetables. Number 3. Radishes. Radishes appear in Egyptian records as wages paid to pyramid workers, alongside garlic and onions. An extraordinary fact given that radishes mature in 25 days. They were currency, which means they were value, which means they were understood as genuinely important food. Ancient Chinese agricultural texts from the Zhou dynasty document radish cultivation as a primary cold-season crop. Greek physicians prescribed radish juice for gallbladder complaints, a use that aligns with modern research showing that radish compounds stimulate bile production. Roman farmers planted radishes as a trap crop for aphids and flea beetles, one of the earliest documented uses of companion planting in the agricultural record. Here is the genuinely surprising detail. The radish plant, most Westerners discard entirely the seed pod. Harvested when the plant bolts and flowers, was the primary form in which radish was eaten across much of Southeast Asia for centuries. Radish seed pods, crunchy and mildly pungent, contain glucosinolate concentrations significantly higher than the root and were pickled, stir-fried, and eaten raw across Indian, Thai, and Vietnamese culinary traditions. Most American home gardeners pull and discard a bolted radish without knowing the pod is a legitimate vegetable in its own right. Radish root contains raffinine, an antimicrobial compound studied for its effects on the gut microbiome, and sulforaphane, a glucosinolate similar to the sulforaphane in kale. The root also contains significant amounts of folate and vitamin C, both of which degrade rapidly after harvest. A radish pulled from the ground and eaten within an hour contains measurably more vitamin C than one that spent 3 days in a produce case. This is why market gardeners in 19th century Boston sold radishes. That morning, the nutritional case for freshness was empirically observable even before anyone could measure a vitamin. So French breakfast or cherry belle. In September, half an inch deep, 1 inch apart, thin to 2 inches. They mature in 3 to 4 weeks. Interplant between slower beets and carrots. The radishes come out before the roots need the room. Leave your last planting to bolt. Harvest the seed pods at 3 to 4 inches long, and discover a vegetable your neighbors have never eaten. Number 2. Winter rye. Winter rye is not typically counted among vegetables, and yet its inclusion here is deliberate because every culture that maintained a fall garden through history understood that the fertility of next year's food was itself something you planted in September. This is the agricultural principle that agribusiness spent 70 years making you forget the ground can feed itself if you let it. Rye appears in the Hebrew scriptures, in Exodus chapter 9. Listed among the crops destroyed by the plague of hail, kusameth in Hebrew. Identified by botanists as rye or emmer wheat. It was already, by that point in Egyptian history, a recognized grain crop significant enough to merit specific mention. In the ancient world, cereal rye was understood as the grain of endurance, the grain that survived, conditions that killed wheat and barley. Celtic and Germanic peoples, inhabiting climates where wheat was unreliable, made cereal rye, the foundation of their agricultural systems for over 2,000 years. Here is the rare agricultural science. Most guides omit winter rye's root system, exudes specific compounds, benzoxazinoids, that function as natural herbicide inhibitors, suppressing weed germination in the soil. When rye is terminated in spring and turned under, these compounds persist in the soil for several weeks, reducing weed pressure on the subsequent crop. This is why old-time farmers who followed rye with corn, Eli's practice documented in his journal, had consistently cleaner corn stands than neighbors who left ground bare over winter. The land-grant universities spent roughly 40 years formally confirming what those farmers already knew. Winter rye also fixes atmospheric nitrogen through its relationship with soil fungi, specifically mycorrhizal networks that facilitate nitrogen transfer between root exudates and fungal hyphae. The USDA's Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education Program has published multiple trials confirming that rye cover crops contribute measurable nitrogen and organic matter to subsequent crops, reducing synthetic fertilizer requirements by amounts that justify the economics. Broadcast 1 to 2 pounds of seed per 1,000 square feet in September. Rake in lightly, and let the fall rains carry it down. Terminate in spring by cutting or rolling before it reaches 18 inches tall and turning it under. That green mass is next year's fertility, already paid for by this September's $2 seed packet. Number 1. Onions. The onion is mentioned more times in the Hebrew scriptures and surrounding ancient literature than almost any other cultivated plant. It appears in the wilderness, Lament of Numbers 11. It is documented in Egyptian tomb paintings at Saqqara, dated to 3200 B.C., making it one of the oldest, continuously cultivated vegetables in human history. The tomb of Ramesses IV, examined in detail by archaeologists, contained dried onion skins, placed in the eye sockets of the mummy, a practice that appears in multiple Egyptian burials, and suggests the onion had ritual significance beyond its nutritional value. Ancient Egyptian religious texts describe the onion's layered structure as a symbol of cosmic order. Greek physicians, including Dioscorides, prescribed onion juice for infections and for what they called weakness of the chest. Roman military surgeons carried dried onions on campaign. Pliny documented this specifically. Ayurvedic texts prescribed raw onion for what practitioners called pitta imbalance, associated with inflammatory conditions. TCM used onion preparations for respiratory complaints and for cold invasions. The convergence across these traditions is not coincidental. It reflects generations of careful empirical observation that the modern biochemistry of the onion now partially explains. The primary active compound in onions, quercetin, is one of the most studied flavonoids in nutritional science. Research published in peer-reviewed journals, including the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, has examined quercetin for its effects on inflammatory biomarkers, blood pressure, and immune function. Results have been consistent enough to sustain continued investigation across multiple research groups. What most guides don't mention is that quercetin in onions is bound to sugar molecules, forming quercetin glucosides, which affects its bioavailability significantly. Cooking onions, particularly slow cooking or caramelizing, begins to break these bonds and can increase the proportion of free quercetin available for absorption. Here is the genuinely rare preparation detail. The highest quercetin concentration in an onion is in the outermost dry layers, the papery skins, and in the flesh immediately beneath them. Traditional European soup-making practices, now vanishing, included simmering onion skins in broth, specifically to extract these compounds. The golden color of a properly made French onion soup comes in part from quercetin-rich compounds leached from the outer layers during the long caramelization. Those papery outer skins, which virtually every modern recipe instructs you to discard, contain quercetin concentrations measured at 2 to 3 times the level of the inner flesh. The second detail, red onions contain anthocyanins, in addition to quercetin, the same pigment family studied in blueberries and elderberries, concentrated in the colored layers. Slicing red onions and soaking them briefly in cold water preserves the anthocyanins, but removes most of the bitter sulfur compounds, making them milder for raw eating while retaining the pigment content that traditional cooks in Mediterranean cultures preserved through cold preparations, including escabeche and agrodolce. Here is the most counterintuitive finding in onion research: the same compounds that make your eyes water, the volatile sulfur gases released when you cut an onion, are precursor molecules to the thiosulfonates that have been studied for cardiovascular effects. Letting a cut onion sit exposed for 10 minutes before cooking allows these compounds to develop further through enzymatic action. The kitchen trick of refrigerating onions before cutting to reduce tearing also slows the enzymatic reaction, a trade-off worth knowing. Plant onion sets or transplants in September for an overwintered spring harvest, or sow seeds now for green onion harvests through fall and winter. Walla Walla. Yellow of Parma. Red Torpedo. These are the heirloom varieties that carry the full quercetin profiles that selective commercial breeding has in some cases reduced. One established bed, kept divided and replanted annually, provides your household with onions from September through the following summer, with no gap. The ancient Egyptians placed them at the eyes of their dead. The wandering people of the desert wilderness cried out for them by name. Roman surgeons carried them on campaign. The researchers of our own era are still working through why. Before you go, there is one thing that runs through every vegetable on this list, and most guides never say it plainly. The active compounds in these plants: the allicin, the sulforaphane, the quercetin, the betalains. The thylakoids are not stable under the conditions of industrial food processing. High heat, extended storage, exposure to oxygen, blanching in large volumes of water, and the weeks between harvest and purchase that define the commercial produce chain all degrade these compounds before they reach you. A beet grown in your September garden and pulled in November retains compounds that a beet shipped from a processing facility 3 weeks ago has lost a meaningful percentage of. A kale leaf cut and eaten within an hour of harvest, with its myrosinase enzyme still active, delivers sulforaphane that a kale leaf blanched for freezing cannot. This is not a small distinction. It is the core of why the people who grew their own food generation after generation, century after century, understood intuitively that fresh, whole, and homegrown was different from preserved, processed, and purchased. They didn't have bioavailability research. They had outcomes. They had themselves, and their children, and the quiet observation of what kept a family well through the months when the world outside offered nothing. Walter Boyd fed 9 people through a Kentucky winter, not because he had access to anything unavailable to you. He had ground and seed, and the knowledge of what September was for. You have all 3. Pick one crop from this list. 1, not 12. The person who plants 12 crops this weekend in a burst of enthusiasm and plants nothing next year is doing less than the person who puts in 1 row of beets this Sunday and does it every September for the rest of their life. So plant the 1 row, put in the 1 clump, broadcast the 1 bag of rye. Then come back and tell me below, what did your grandparents plant in September that nobody in your family grows anymore? What is the crop sitting in an old photograph or an old recipe card that you never learned how to put in the ground? Because that is the one I am building next. Like this video and share it with someone who has a patch of ground and doesn't know what September is for anymore. Subscribe if you haven't, because the next video covers the forgotten storage vegetables that Eli grew in that journal every fall of his life. The ones that kept in a root cellar from October to Easter, with no electricity and no freezer. There is 1 root on that list, not sold in an American grocery store in 60 years. Your grandparents planted every one of these. Somebody just didn't get the chance to pass it down. Now it's yours again. Don't let it end with you.